Does the way we speak impact how people perceive us? That's a question I've wondered about a lot because I spent a lot of time as a child taking speech lessons for what was called tongue thrusting. And I also used to reverse words. Instead of saying cathedral ceilings, I would say cathedral feelings. A lot of the speech classes I took, they just basically told me, slow down, Diane, take your time and be present in the moment. So I guess that presence part started at an early age, thanks to all those speech teachers I used to work with. But today I have a professional with me, and we're going to break down speech pathology versus just dialect and conversation, and how we can all learn to speak and present ourselves better. My guest is Melanie Fox. She is a speech and dialect coach. So please say hello.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So, speech. The first impression, we meet someone, we have instant first impressions. Their handshake, how they look, whether they're standing, slumped over, back. I spend a lot of my day working with people on the physical ways we present ourselves. Speech is a whole category onto itself. So, what do you have to say about that, Melanie?
Well, it's the audio component for sure, as well as a lot of the visuals. So when you speak, there's a lot to it. The way you sound, the way you look when you speak. Some people speak that use American Sign Language, so it may be a lot of physical activity, but definitely it will be, body language and all of the above that you mentioned. So it makes a major impact on the way that people perceive you.
Now, a speech and dialect coach, let's define dialect. What is dialect?
So a dialect is the way people speak a certain language. So I'd say in English, we could have, say, standard American English or general American English. And that's one dialect. It has an accent or sound to it. It may have individual vocabulary words or idiomatic expressions. And there may be other components to the dialect related to, say, the intonation or syllable-stress or something like that. So it's the sound plus more. So it's more specific than a language, but it's sort of the way you'd speak a language. So if there were a hierarchy, it would sort of be not the animal, but the breed.
Okay, so in dialect, that could be, let's say I'm watching Mobland or Peaky Blinders, and they're speaking English, but
it may be
I'm trying to understand it.
Exactly. So you might be listening to an Irish dialect like Dublin English or something like that. So yeah, it's
so it's the same language, but it's almost like the accents people throw into it when they say a Staten Island versus a Long Island versus a New York accent.
And you named some of my original accents right there. So my family's from Brooklyn, and I grew up I was born in Brooklyn and grew up in Staten Island, and then lived on Long Island, and then moved to Manhattan. So even in this small geographic area, I encountered multiple different accents. So yeah, it would be more specific than just the language itself. So the dialect is going to be the accent and the way you sound, plus other types of elements, including culture. And so a dialect is usually a mutually intelligible within a language. So if someone from the north and someone from the south of the U.S. spoke, they should be able to understand each other because they're both speaking English. But there are definitely nuances that you would pick up on if you were to speak the language to know person A is from a different place than person B.
It's a funny one because I come from a family of 5 kids, so 2 brothers and 2 sisters and me. And when people hear us speak when we're in the same room, people will always say, "Did you grow up with your brothers and sisters?" Because I don't have that Long Island accent. And I don't know what my accent is, but it's whatever the speech teacher, coached me towards.
Nice. Sort of a standard, and you're in media, so it would be more of a media newscaster style accent that is more neutral to the ear and doesn't necessarily ring of a specific region. So you sort of, there's everybody has what's called an idiolect, your individual dialect. So everyone's got one, and everyone speaks with an accent of some sort. But some accents, for example, in the US, are more neutral. And so they would be more of the business English, newscaster English, and what would either be called standard American English or general American English. That tends to be the name of the dialect. In England, RP, or received pronunciation, is the Queen's English and is very codified. So people study it and people know it as a certain dialect. Whereas in the US, it's sort of the lack of having a certain regional sound that puts you in this category of the standard or general American. But it's interesting to think about that in the US, we don't really focus so much on teaching a neutral dialect, whereas in England, they definitely have schooling that focuses on this RP as a sort of a posh and upper class type of sound to strive for many people.
How do you think that came about?
Well, when the U.S. was being formed, there were people that came from all areas, not just folks from parts of the UK and Ireland and areas around there, but folks from Europe, and people settled on the East Coast, and the East Coast had many different dialects, and they were stronger. And as people moved west, the dialects mixed. So you could even look at a map, if you Google it, of a map of US dialects. They seem to be very strong, distinct colors along the eastern seaboard, and then they get kind of mushy as you go to the west, and they sort of neutralize as people, when they settled on the East Coast, they brought their culture with them. And as they became Americans, or at least United States Americans, they moved and intermingled, and you saw the dialect neutralize a bit. So you can actually see the map of the really defined dialects, and then and see it get neutral as you move west. And then there are some dialects that you can, like the Valley Girl accent in California, for example, in LA, you could probably find on a map in the west. But in general, you'll see this this neutralizing or intermingling of dialects so that it's not so recognizable as you move away from the East Coast. So it's interesting to see the impact of the settlers and then the impact of the intermingling.
Although the closer you get to Canada, you get another one.
Yes. But I'd say in the East, especially, so I have relatives and a college roommate from Buffalo. Yeah. And so you also have sort of the Viking influence up there in Minnesota as part of it.
Yes, yeah. Minnesota was the first one I thought of. Minnesota.
They live there always in Minnesota.
Yeah. It's so funny how the different dialects become so identifiable. And what do you think they say about people?
Well, there was a video that came out, I want to say in the 1970s, called American Tongues. And American Tongues was one of the first videos I watched in linguistics class at Georgetown. And I said, okay, first, this is incredible that people study dialects and go around the country recording people. And this was one of my inspirations to become a dialect coach. But also the video was very revealing of people's prejudices. And if you watch the video, there were some things that even now you'd cringe if you saw someone say this on a recording. But people sort of let it all out. What they think, the Northerners were asked what they think of people from the South. The Southerners were asked what they think of people from the North. People said their favorite and least favorite dialects. And people make some major judgments about other people especially if they don't know them yet, and it's a sort of a first impressions. And when a dialect is different than yours, you may have some internal prejudices or at least stereotypes, good or bad, that you impose on this person who's speaking. And just to mention, one of the applications that I use this in my work is I work with medical malpractice defense attorneys, because when the doctors take the stand, the jurors are supposed to judge them very quickly and decide, is this person liable or not liable? And the jurors they see the doctor and they hear the doctor speaking. Now, the doctor is under a lot of pressure, especially when they're doing the cross-examine, right? There's a lawyer that's saying things to their face fairly aggressively, and some of them may not be true. And the way that this doctor responds is going to influence how the jury decides their fate. And so if this doctor is either struggling to understand the question or struggling to answer in English or speaking in a dialect that those jurors don't readily understand, if the jurors are struggling to understand them, or if the jurors hear their accent and it reminds them of something else, if there's anything negative tied to that, it's unfair to that doctor, but it's a reality that this may be happening. And so I work with
Wow.
these lawyers, these attorneys that are there to support the doctors so that the doctors can speak a clearer English, more neutral, easily understood by the jurors, so that the jurors don't either struggle to understand them, make rash judgments, or even misunderstand them, which might even be the worst case scenario. And not only is the doctor trying to get their point across under this intense examination, but the doctor is likely explaining things that are complicated, and they may be speaking doctorese. So not only do they have the non-native English barrier to overcome, but they're trying to explain advanced concepts to people who are not only not doctors, but they likely don't suffer from that same medical malady that the defendant did, that the accusing party did. So there's a lot of pressure on that doctor. And the fact that last year 5 different attorneys found me with no mutual connections, and they just said, I heard you help. Can you please come in for some assistance so that my doctor could sound clear on the stand? It shows up in verdicts from juries.
That is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And even, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
There was a client from India who spoke English natively, but the syllable-stress may make it hard to understand. So instead of referral, they may say referral.
Yes.
And so that, or instead of a word like ultrasound, they may say ultrasound.
Yes.
So there's nothing wrong or better. There's nothing wrong with Indian English. There's nothing better about American English.
Tomato.
It's just that the jurors their ears are wired, ready to absorb the language one way. And when something like a syllable stress is changed from what they're used to, or there's a delta between what word they're used to hearing and the word that was produced, it may trigger thoughts or misunderstandings that negatively impact that doctor. So it definitely shows up in people's judgments, and sometimes in a negative way. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality that people make judgments and they use, whether consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously, they're using some data that they have and making judgments on the person who's speaking.
Now, is there a general dialect that's less likely to trigger any of this?
So the more neutral one that I mentioned before in American English, they usually call it Standard American English, which they abbreviate SAE, or General American English, which they abbreviate GAE. It's kind of a nerdy linguistic term that they throw on it, but it's more of an accent that doesn't sound like it's from a specific region of the U.S.
Right.
So by default, it's kind of the neutral. But there's no true, again, unlike RP, which is very specific and codified in England, this neutral accent is sort of choices that are less likely to make you think of a region. But no one typically studies it unless you're an actor that's really going into dialectology or really working on your neutral accent. Or maybe an opera singer might study phonetics and make choices to sound a certain way when they sing to allow more resonance to their voice, or maybe someone in the field of linguistics, like I studied, would really get nerdy and geeky on these accents to figure out which sound patterns are considered most neutral here in the U.S.
So I can understand an actor for a role, or a singer trying to reach a certain audience, maybe in a different country, or, as you said, which was very fascinating, an attorney using you to help prompt their clients to speak in a way that the jury pool might better relate to. What about everyday people? Why would someone seek out you, or an expert in speech and dialect, to change their tone of voice or how they speak or their dialect?
It's a great question. I love how you asked it. And I'm going to mention that some people hear what I do, since it's called accent reduction, when you take someone's accent and go from their current to a more neutral accent. They usually refer to that as accent reduction. A nicer way to say that is accent modification. The way that I would like to refer to it as clear, confident English, but it's not what my clients are typically Googling. So I have to go to what my clients say is what I say. But the idea is if somebody does not sound clear and they get negative feedback from either clients or prospects, or if they're in customer service, they may hear it from their bosses or from clients or even from peers. If they have this thought that they don't sound clear, then they usually don't feel confident. And when someone doesn't sound clear, they don't feel confident. And when they don't feel confident, they tend to not be so authentic. So when some people hear accent reduction, they'll say to me, people usually who are standard English speakers will say, why would you ever tell anyone to reduce their accent? And my answer is always, I don't tell anybody to modify their accent in any way. But when people don't feel confident, they'll seek me out to say, hey, I don't feel confident in the way I speak because I'm not clear, or people are focused on how I'm saying something and not what I'm saying. And I'm trying to deliver my message. And when I speak in a certain way, which is the way I currently speak, I'm getting negative interference because people are distracted, or people are asking me to repeat myself, or people are asking me where I'm from, or making comments, or imitating me. And for any of those reasons, when someone starts to feel uncomfortable, they tend to stop speaking in public, or they tend to not take opportunities to be in the spotlight, or they avoid being the face of their company. And so my goal is to empower people, enable them to speak clear so that I'm empowering them to feel confident and be themselves. So I'm definitely not trying to take anything away from the clients and their culture and their identity and their personalities. I'm trying to embolden them to say, look, if I can teach you some patterns, some techniques, some strategies, so that when you speak, you sound clear on the first try, then you can stop worrying about that type of thing and start being yourself and start getting out there and being in the spotlight and not worrying. Let go of the speech piece because your training will get you there and the rest of it will just come. So that's the idea, is that I want to teach people, and I do teach people, to speak clear and confident English. And once they hit their stride, they tend to be themselves even more. So they tend to talk about themselves, their personalities, their perspectives, their culture. And so it's not about losing something. It's about an on-ramp to get access so then they can feel comfortable being themselves.
Great explanation. Really great explanation.
Thank you.
Speech versus dialect. What's the difference?
So speech is the broad category. So I offer 3 services that all fall into speech. We talked about 2 of them. Accent reduction, also known as accent modification or clear, confident English. That is the first bucket. And that is usually when someone is starting with accent X and going to accent Y. And in that case, X is not the neutral one here in the US, and Y, the accent Y is usually they're looking to sound more neutral, to eliminate the distractions. Dialect coaching is what actors would say when they're trying to learn a new dialect for a character. So they want to sound authentic. They don't want to sound like a cartoon, unless they're doing a cartoon. In that case, maybe they do want to sound like one. But they want to be respectful. They want to be strategic. They want to learn it fast, and they usually have a script. And so we're not just ad-libbing. Usually for the dialect coaching, usually they have something very specific to do. And yes, a comedian can learn to ad-lib, but the idea is they've got something focused. It's not just going to be ongoing conversation over time. So the dialect coaching we tend to do for a limited scope, for a very specific character. They usually know, I want to be, this type of character, this age, this gender, this culture, this city. So they'll have something very specific to work on. They may even be modeling off an individual that they're trying to emulate. So for the dialect coaching, it's usually a term actors use. And typically they use it when dialect X is the neutral that they already speak as an actor, and dialect Y that they're going to is something regional. Now, an actor could say, hey, I'm a British actor, I'm from England, and I want to sound American. They could refer to that as dialect coaching. And an American trying to sound British can also refer to that as dialect coaching. And someone who's not a native speaker who wants to sound neutral in English, they may call it accent reduction. They may call it dialect coaching. But the second bucket is usually actors who want to change the way they sound for a specific role, or for it to avoid being typecast or pigeonholed. They can want dialect coaching. But in that case, is dialect coaching and accent reduction the same? Could be. But usually the actors say it because they want to change their dialect for something specific relating to acting. The third bucket that I do under speech coaching is presentation and interview skills. So we're talking about speech in a broader sense here. So in this case, someone doing a podcast interview, much like this, a job interview, a college interview, even a co-op board interview in New York City. It's very competitive and hard to get. So you want to make sure these are high stakes moments that you're prepared for your interview. And also panel discussions at conferences. These tend to be the interviews that people will hire me to coach them on because the outcome really matters to them. It's something very specific, and when they go into that interview, they want to be prepared. They don't want to be nervous. And when they come out, they want to be happy with the end result. So that's part of what I do there. And the presentation skills, this can be a keynote speech. It could be a town hall, important business meetings. It could be investor pitches, networking pitches, sales pitches, even a wedding speech. Anything that somebody is doing that's a high-stakes speech and they care about the outcome and they want to put a lot of preparation into it, or at least some preparation to have a better outcome. This is part of the third bucket, which is I call presentation and interview skills. You can also refer to it as media training or other types of coaching, but the idea for me is I tend to be very specific to say, who's your audience? How long do you have? Do you need a PowerPoint deck? I can make a deck for you. I could help you with teleprompting, whatever you need, technology or not. Let's figure out who your audience is, what you want those outcomes to be, and then reverse engineer this speech to make sure you hit all of your goals. So in all of this, I'd call this all speech coaching. And then the accent reduction tends to be going towards neutral. Dialect coaching tends to be towards actors. And specific speech engagements tends to be that third bucket of media training or presentation and interviews. So that, to me, speech is the overall umbrella. And under speech can be areas that I don't touch on. I'm not a speech pathologist. I'm a linguist. So
What's the difference?
I come from the language science background. So my master's of science is in linguistics, which is the science of languages. So language learning falls into this category. Language acquisition, you could refer to it as. Computational linguistics, I studied languages and technology. There are other pieces, sociolinguistics, studying the sociological impacts of language. And there are tons of other studies. Theoretical linguistics goes into, again, for lack of a better term, all the geeky stuff, but my geeky area is phonetics and phonology, the study of the science of sounds, acoustically, how to articulate them. Phonology is the study of how an individual language has their speech and language patterns, so their phonetic patterns in one language. So all of this geeky stuff is also part of linguistics. But
would you work with that? Would you be working with phonetics? Would you be working with people, let's say, who are dyslexic?
I usually would apply phonetics to the accent reduction. So the dyslexia and other things that are more on the pathological, like medical-based issues would be for a speech pathologist. So that would so I would refer out. And I know a few speech pathologists that I like very much. So if somebody calls me and says, hey, my husband recently had a surgery, and I'll say, let me stop you right there. That sounds medical. You may have insurance that covers that. So let me refer you to a speech pathologist. And so that would be an SLP designation, a speech and language pathologist. So if somebody has a lisp or a swallowing problem or something that's mechanical in their mouth, regardless of what language they're speaking, that would likely go to the speech pathologist because it feels medical in nature. And so, for example, I wouldn't work with people with swallowing problems or people that have a tongue tie, that there was something medical that went on. And so one of the reasons I say right away, let me send you to a speech pathologist, might be covered by your medical insurance. So for me, language learners fall into the linguistic science. Anyone changing their accent or dialect would fall into the linguistic science, something where I'm coaching to change sounds, but not because of anything medical.
Okay, so I have to ask you a question.
Yes.
I studied Spanish for 6 years, and everyone was like, oh, you're going to pick up Italian really easily. Well,
they are both
found
romance.
I can only do Italian if I'm moving my hand like this. So what can you tell me about being a speech and dialect pathologist? I mean, a speech and dialect coach. What does moving your hand have to do with how you speak?
Well, you certainly want to include body language in your speech, right? So even though I'm trying to be very still so I don't knock on the table or move out of frame, in life, body language is part of your your speech, right? So there's the speech that comes out of your mouth, but language includes body language. So if you feel like it gets you into the mood to do a little bit of this or to make some gestures that
I'm not even sure it gets me into the mood. I just find it gets me into the pace. I find because Italian has a pace to it.
You're sort of making your own metronome.
Spanish is it's very fast. Yes, it's like a metronome.
Exactly. You're getting yourself into the groove. So if you see native speakers using their hands, the best copy that you could do is look exactly at the native speaker and try to emulate them. Of course, make it your own over time. But in the beginning, you want to be a parrot as much as possible, going right back to the source of native speakers. So Italian people are, famous for their hand gestures. And there are some great Instagram accounts of what different gestures mean in Italian without any words. Spaniards use gestures too. I studied abroad in Spain. And one thing that I really enjoyed was when I said something and it wasn't accurate, meaning I'd say, "Oh, is the cafe still open right now?" I'd get this answer a lot. And I'd say, "Oh my goodness, I like this gesture." Yeah. It was a moving finger. It was a no, but not you did something bad. Is I'm correcting you. You have an incorrect assumption. And they did a clicking noise and the finger wag. And I said, "I am taking this. I am adopting this." So I couldn't wait till a Spaniard asked me a question about something and I had a correction. And I went. And then I said, "Did I do it right? Did I get it?" So there are lots of gestures unique to languages. And it's important to know, for example, we use our middle fingers to signal something that is, a curse word or something that is inappropriate for work. But when I was in Spain, people gestured with the middle finger in class. Yeah. Were professors. And I said, "Oh, I guess the middle finger doesn't have the same impact here. It doesn't have the same meaning." Thumbs up may mean something very negative in different cultures. So having a thumbs up emoji that you send to someone by text may be very bad to certain cultures. So it's good to know when you're going to another country and attempting to speak the language, are there any differences in hand gestures? Are there any differences in body language? Do people look each other in the eye? Do you hand your business card like this by looking at the card first, like you would in certain countries in Asia, like Japan? And so there are a lot of gestures that go along with language that would be very important. And this is going back to the med-mal. It's important on the stand as well as in a boardroom or in a courtroom or in socializing to know the gestures, the rules of eye contact, and any other cultural pieces that affect language or language orally or body language. So it's a really great thing to think about. And I think if it helps your Italian to do a little bit of this, as long as somebody knows that you're, well-intentioned, I think, rev yourself up with the hand gestures and maybe learn a variety of them. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. You triggered a couple of funny memories, one with the metronome and one with the hand motions, because when I was like 18 years old, I worked in Korean films. And one time, we were out in actually Roosevelt Island recording, and I remember the director going like this to me, and I thought he was telling me to squat down. So I'm squatting, and he spoke Korean, and I spoke English, and the translator wasn't there that day, and next thing he grabs my hair and is like pulling me along because he meant come here. Oh. Whereas we would go like this, he was going like this. Oh. And I totally missed that one.
That is so interesting.
Hand gestures are a big one. But the other thing you mentioned was metronome. And it triggered a real memory for me because when I took speech classes as a child, and they were trying to get me to slow down because they said, you'll be more clear and you will stumble on your words less and you're less likely to tongue thrust, which is, I was putting S's on everything, which I still every so often hear. Maybe need to go back to some speech classes, but they would have you sit with the metronome and you'd go A, B, C, D, E, F, just to get you to slow down. And then you would move from the alphabet, you would move to my name is Diane Grissel. Dun, dun. And then you would speed the metronome and then they would slow the metronome. And I remember there were times the metronome was moving so slow. It was like, A, B. But do you still use metronomes in your speech?
I don't tend to use metronomes in my speech lessons. I used to play the piano, so that's where the metronome came in when you did this. It reminded me of a
Yeah.
So what I do agree with, in very early in this conversation, you said people told you slow down, articulate more slowly, but I always recommend to my clients, if they're speaking quickly, native speaker or non-native speaker, especially if you're making a speech, it's very important to slow down and to start at the pace that you want to emulate, because it's very easy, myself included. I'm a New Yorker. I get excited. I am naturally a very fast talker. And so when I am giving any kind of presentation, especially if it's to a large audience at once, and you need to project and you need to make sure that everyone can hear you even in the back row, it's very important to slow down, and it does a few things. The first thing it does, it allows you to think. Because if you're going a mile a minute, say you're on a job interview even, and you're nervous, or you're being interviewed during a podcast, and you start quickly. First of all, you may start before you decided on what your answer was going to be. So if you start at a high pace and you don't know in your head what the structure of your answer will be, you might be on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. You may start really quickly and realize, oh my, I'm going so quickly, I can't stop to think, so I'm just going to take any twist and turn that comes up, and you may forget what the original question was by that point. So it's very important to slow your pace. So A, you're not on a wild ride. You have time to articulate. You have time to think. If you pause, it's not super jarring because you went at a pace that already allowed you to think a little bit, and that pace allows you to take a breath, breathe, think during the breathing, and decide where your answer is going to go. And it will be a little bit less of word vomit if you have a little bit of a chance to think about where you're going with your answer. So I always recommend slowing down, A, for thinking, B, for articulating. If you're a non-native speaker, it will be easier for people to understand you if you go a little slower. A, because you'll probably be better at articulating, and B, because if there is a discrepancy in what you say and what they're used to hearing in the audience, they have time to kind of sift through their brain to autocorrect what they thought they heard to what they think makes sense. So it provides more time for the audience. And the last piece is, I think it adds executive presence in a way that speeding up does not. And I like to give the analogy of an intern and a CEO. So if you're the intern at a company, you may think that your time is less valuable than the CEO and these sort of C-suite of people. And so if you knock on someone's door, you're probably going to start really quickly, say, excuse me, I just need to interrupt you for a minute because I need to know X, Y, and Z. And you're doing it because you're showing your deference, or you're showing that you are not trying to impose on that other person's time, because your time is somehow less valuable. Maybe not as a person, but maybe money-wise to the company. This person costs the company a lot of money. You cost the least amount as an intern. And so you're showing that you are going to respect that person's time by speaking really quickly. And you'll see CEOs at meetings, and they're going to take their time to start. They're going to take a lot of pauses. They're going to speak as slowly as they like, because they know that everybody must listen because they're the big boss. So if you think about the intern versus the CEO, then you'd think the CEO is going to take their sweet time, and the intern is going to be in a rush. So if you want to work on executive presence, I'd model after that CEO who knows that everyone will wait.
There's that expression that I tell people when I'm teaching negotiation and how to negotiate better, is there's incredible power in the pause. Just like in media interviews, when a reporter pauses, you don't need to fill in that blank. You can appreciate the pause, enjoy the pause, use it to digest, really think of what you want to say next. One of the most fascinating negotiators I ever witnessed, sitting in his office, as he would negotiate $1 million deals for talent. Often, instead of going into that word vomit, as you said, and just hitting, this is why it's going to cost this much, he would say, someone would say, well, you want me to pay what for this? Like, are you kidding? You're asking me to pay $1 million for a 2-hour show? And he would say, well, my answer to you is, and you knew he was sitting there thinking, what the heck's my answer going to be?
Yeah.
But that was his verbal tick or his verbal pause where he collected his thoughts. And then he came up with why they were going to pay it and they were going to be happy paying it. And they did, in fact, pay it.
That's excellent. That's a great example. And something that comes up a lot are people on job interviews saying, well, when they ask the question, I don't know what I'm going to say right away if it's a question that we didn't prep for. And of course, we can prep for a lot of things, but you never know what you're going to be asked on an interview. It may come to the interviewer spontaneously based on something you said, and you can't prep for everything. So what I tell my clients is, it's okay to pause. It's okay to even say, that's a great question. I haven't thought of that. Let me think for a minute of how I'm going to answer this, or I'm going to think about my answer before I start. And it's perfectly fine. It shows a lot of confidence that you're thoughtful, that you're being intentional, that you're interested in the question, and you want to make sure that you're coming up with the best possible answer. Now, you can't say, let me think about that, and then leave for 30 minutes and come back later. But within reason, if you let them know that you're thinking about it and you look happy and excited to answer, and you look like it's really stimulated some interesting thoughts, then go for it. It's better to think and give yourself a pause than to start answering and then either just lose yourself in the answer, not have a battle plan. And
that's great coaching for job interviews for sure, because I do hear, I've hired hundreds of people throughout my career, and it's amazing how people will jump to an answer because they feel like they have to have an answer. Whereas if they just said, now let me think about that a second, let me just gather my thoughts.
Yeah.
Actually, you'd kind of look at them and say, wow, interesting.
Yeah, it's a sign of confidence. It's a sign of maturity. And it also, I tell people going to job interviews, it's a conversation. It's not a test. There's not necessarily a right and wrong answer. There's probably a more suitable answer and a less suitable answer for getting the job. But usually you're not getting a quiz where at the end they're like, right, ding, or, usually it's about the way you answer. It's about the thought process behind your answer. It's what your answer means to you as a fit for that job in that company culturally. And, if your resume doesn't fit, you're likely not even there. So likely you're a potential fit. And if you're not yourself during that interview, then there are two problems. One is, if they hire you, they hired whoever you pretended to be. And that's going to be a long masquerade until they figure out, or until you decide to show them the real you. So you certainly don't want them to hire you if you're not being yourself, because then you're going to have to keep up whoever that person is. And the second thing is, they may really like you. If you're yourself, they're more likely to bond with you as a person. They're not looking for a droid or a bot, or an AI device. They're looking for a person that they'll get along with, that they think that they'll have rapport with, that they think their clients will like. So nerves can drive people to this place that makes them act like they're under fire. And I used to interview a lot of people, especially for small businesses. And I remember one person was like holding on to the chair for dear life. And I remember thinking, you don't need to survive the interview. You need to participate in the interview. Right. So it's not like the dentist chair where when you leave, it's done. Like you're hoping to have made a positive impact. And I remember thinking, this poor person, I really feel for this person and their nerves during the interview process. But it was for a customer service role, and that person needed to be comfortable with people. And he wasn't showing any of those traits on this interview. And my thought was, I was not there to be his coach. I was there to be one of the interviewers on the team. But I remember thinking, this is a person who would benefit so much from coaching, because if his perspective changed just a little bit, and he knew that he should just be himself. And yes, it's nerve-wracking, but just try to put that aside, or even say, I get nervous on interviews, but I'm going to have fun today. Whether you say it out loud or just to yourself on the way in, and slow yourself down, slow down your heartbeat, slow down your breathing. I'm not a breathing expert, but you can do a lot to just slow down, count, maybe 8 beats between breathing in and breathing out. Just try to pace yourself a little from the get-go. It could go a long way.
It's so interesting you say that. Every time I have to give a public speech, and I give a lot of them, I am very nervous. My heart is racing. My palms are sweating. And sometimes I even say this to people out loud at the start of the presentation. I say, I'm nervous. I'm really feeling it right now. I must be excited about speaking with you. And then one time I read an interview with Mick Jagger, and it was on like their 50th anniversary tour. And he said, if somebody said to him, how do you feel when you get on stage now? Is it just old hat to you? And he said, well, if you notice, I never start my first song holding the microphone. He said, and that's because my hands are sweating. I don't know if the audience is going to perceive me as relevant or old or out of date. Or he said, so if I'm holding that microphone, it might slip out of my hand.
Oh, my goodness.
So I walk on stage. I don't touch the microphone. I sing. I might dance. And then when I can feel the pulse of the crowd, I'll grab the microphone.
Wow, that's so interesting. I never heard that conversation with Mick Jagger before.
Yeah, so I remember thinking, and so I'll sometimes even preface a speech with that, because I think if Mick Jagger could say that after 50 years, 60 years, might even be, it's got to be close to 60 years of touring now.
Yeah,
If
a
he
lifetime
can
of being
have
a rock
that moment,
star. Yeah.
Exactly, a lifetime of being a rock star, of someone that we all love, we all want to hear. If he can feel nervous, it's okay. And I think it's a real good thing to remember. You said, on another note now, you said something very interesting when we started. You talked about sparkling.
Yes.
What does sparkling mean to you, and why is sparkling important?
Okay, this is a great question for me. I love this question. So I am a goofball. I'm
a very intelligent goofball, I might add, who knows her stuff.
So I don't like secrets. So I'm 46. I'm 46 years young or years old, or however you want to say it. And the older I get, the more I realize I really can just be myself at all times. Now, of course, you need to be respectful, so you can't just go everywhere and be goofy. But especially when I'm speaking, I like to model being myself for my clients. And so in being myself, one of the things that I get a big kick out of is glitter. I like to put glitter in as many places so I have with me, my business cards have glitter. So I'm going to give a shout to Vicki Winkler, who designed these business cards. Let's see if I can put them.
Oh, yes,
I
see.
There's
Very
glitter
glittery.
Foil. Don't worry, we won't like it on
Wow.
the table, but it is glitter foil all around.
That's very cool.
I have glitter. Oh, and foxes, because I'm a Fox Nut. It is my last name and part of my brand. So my phone sparkles and has some foxes on it. And then even my bag, let's see.
Yes, your bag has a lot of glitter.
My bag has a lot
Very
of glitter.
cool bag.
I changed out the strap just to get more glitter on it. So I use my glitter a lot of times, and my obsession with Fox apparel and with onesies. I love things that are one piece.
I'm a jumpsuit girl.
I know and it's funny. I know they call them jumpsuits once you reach adulthood, but I just
They're
keep
onesies.
calling them onesies. They're onesies to me. But I like to announce early in my speeches, especially if I'm speaking about public speaking, that my goal is not to be perfect. If being perfect is my goal, I likely failed many times over already. But my goal is to be myself and to deliver value to my audience. So back to your thought earlier about, you get nervous when you first go out there. If your mindset becomes, I'm going to help people, the audience that's listening to me is going to gain value. I'm going to help them. They're going to be empowered because of something that only I can give them. Then your focus shifts to being sort of a servant to the audience and not a perfect reflection of yourself in every word that you tried to memorize.
Great visual.
So the idea of the sparkle is that early on in the presentations, if I'm talking about public speaking, I will say, my goal today is not to be perfect. My goal today is to be me and to deliver value to you. And so I want to tell you about me and things that I like to do and things that I enjoy. And I'll mention that I enjoy sparkling and glitter and onesies and Fox apparel. I love watching MMA. I'm obsessed with the UFC. And it is actually my goal, and I'm saying it here as well, to be the first speech coach to infiltrate the UFC. Because I want to help the fighters speak English directly into the microphone. And sometimes they have interpreters who still may be helpful in interpreting a question. But I want those fighters to look directly into that person's eyes or into the audience's eyes, speak into the mic, and say from their heart, not from the mouth of someone else who just interpreted what they were saying. I want them to be able to speak to the audience.
Well, I know someone to introduce you to on that, because I just recently interviewed Jill Diamond Chastain. and she is the executive chairman of the World Boxing.
Oh.
World Boxing, not Federation, Council, World Boxing Council, WBC.
How wonderful.
And she expanded the women's boxing division in that. And we just were discussing how UFC is now getting very involved in the world of boxing and the integrations that are happening there. She's a great woman. I'll be happy to make that intro.
I would be honored. And, I'm helping folks in multiple sports, but the reason I zeroed in on the UFC is because I'm such a fan. I've watched some athletes that won fight after fight after fight. And one of them that just won a belt is Magomed Ankalaev. And he doesn't speak much, and he doesn't speak English, and he uses an interpreter, and he's very quiet. And he needed so many fights to get to the top because in the words of the UFC podcast, they were afraid he couldn't carry a pay-per-view. Because he didn't have, if you don't speak directly to the audience, you likely don't have the fans, the social media following, you don't get the sponsorships and endorsements, and you may not even get those fights right away because the audience needs to come with you to make money for the organization, which is understandable. It's not necessarily
it's show business.
Right. It makes sense. And there are other fighters, and Chael Sonnen is one of them. He's retired now, but he got many title fights. He was never the champion, but he was extremely talented, but he was also extremely talented on the microphone, and he made himself the bully, or he calls himself the heel, and he was able to take that microphone and turn it into gold. And he created drama and animosity between some of the title holders, and he got himself many fights. He fought Anderson Silva twice. He fought John Jones. I mean, he fought some big names, and he hosted the Ultimate Fighter twice as a coach, and he's on that podcast, the UFC podcast called Good Guy, Bad Guy with Daniel Cormier. And so he showed how your mouth can make you money in sports. Yes, you need the talent and you need the skill, but the mouth can get you there. And there's another example. It's a little crude, so I'll ask for permission, but is it okay to say something on the crude side? One of my favorite fighters, Derek Lewis. After one of the fights, Joe Rogan came up with the microphone, and Derek Lewis had taken his shorts off. He was wearing underwear, but and Joe Rogan said, "Derek Lewis, why'd you take your pants off?" And Derek Lewis said, "My balls was hot." And that clip went so viral that the next time he fought, and he fought soon after that, in the audience, everybody had the "My Balls Was Hot" shirts. I own 3 of them myself, not going to lie. I thought it was hysterical. It wasn't perfect English. It wasn't the English that you'd hear, coming from writers. It was vernacular, fun English. I believe he's from New Orleans, or at least from Louisiana, which I don't think New Orleans, but I think the state of Louisiana, which has a lot of culture and a lot of fun people come from that state. And it just showed his true colors, and he's a fun guy, and he's funny. And it started escalating. He took more than that off. He threw his cup at one of the future fights, and it became a thing. But it started because he took the mic, took control, and said something that captured the audience, and they went wild, and they stayed with him. So if you can think, again, back to the glitter, what is your thing? What
hold on. We got to go with that, because that's an interesting point between dialect and speech and capturing the mic. Because, for example, we could take Mike Tyson, arguably one of the biggest names in boxing, and he's got a distinct lisp. And I always found it part of his charm.
It was
if you can call Mike Tyson charming, there's something charming about him when he speaks.
He's engaging. He's charismatic in his own way. He didn't sound like everybody else. He owned it. And I think that he made it his own. If he was embarrassed about it and then shied away from interviews, then maybe people wouldn't even have known too much about how he speaks, but it became iconic, And so I think if people figure out, what is your thing? What do you like? Not just what it should be, but, even in the UFC, what music are you coming out to? Can you make that part of your thing? What will people remember you for? It could be a gimmick. It could be something that's from your heart, like a platform. A few fighters were talking about awareness of depression and suicide, and for men to be able to speak out to other folks and let them know that something was going on in their lives. So there were a lot of different people that used the UFC as a platform. There were some folks that used it. I mean, Conor McGregor, who's very Irish, very Dublin, urban sound, very recognizable accent. He launched a liquor brand, Proper 12, and when he was losing a fight, I said, "Oh my God, what a smart SOB! This guy is losing right over his logo." So he might be losing that fight, but he's winning because his logo for Proper 12 is in that shot, and people might be like, "Oh, isn't that Connor's brand? Maybe I should try it." I mean, so he may have lost the fight and won a different battle, and he made a ton of money, and he's a controversial figure. But just talking about owning the microphone, owning your thing, and whether that is something that is goofy, whether it's, for me, I can be very serious when I'm teaching speech and using phonetics, but I can still be fun. And I've had clients that were very proper in nature come and say, "Hey, Melanie, I got the bling bling shoes," and show me that they had glitter shoes just like I did. And I said, "Well, that's so much fun." Or they showed me what their, did they like?
Right.
I also like animal print. Maybe they showed me that they had that or something totally different. Maybe somebody likes hats, somebody likes rings, somebody likes a certain color. And you get to, if you give people a way in, whether it's an audience that doesn't know you, a person who's interviewing you for the first time, or even people that you meet all the time, when they get to know you and they feel like, "Oh, I can relate because my daughter does this too," or my grandma used to, do X, Y, or Z, or I love that, or I never thought of that before, but because you did this, I went out and tried it. It's not to say, oh, you have to become an influencer, but let people know what you like, what you don't like, what you need help with.
Wait a second. The time always goes so quick here, but we have got to wrap up. We're down to our last 30 or so seconds or so. So what would be a closing thing when you said it's tough, it's not what people search? What are search terms people would look to find you?
So people find me under speech coach. If you add New York City to it or Manhattan, you'll find me there as well. Accent reduction, accent modification, clear, confident English is the term I hope comes out. Dialect coaching, presentation skills, interview skills, media training. But overall, if I have to leave you with something, I'd say passion over perfection. You definitely don't need to be perfect when you speak, but if you didn't show your personality and your perspective and your passion and you as a person, as an individual, then you left something out. So be yourself everywhere you go and you won't regret it.
That is great advice. My guest today has been Melanie Fox. She is a speech and dialect coach. There are going to be all kinds of links to her below this podcast. I know I learned a lot. And this is a very shareable episode. And I do hope you follow Melanie. I hope you hit subscribe. We're recording in Manhattan Center, one of my favorite places. We're in TV too, and I just love it. And thank you very much, Melanie, for joining me.
Thank you so much. And I hope you follow me and check out my new podcast called Hack That Accent.
There you go.
Thank you so much for having me, Diane.
Thank you.